to nutrient usage to create dopamine and serotonin and glutathione. So important for our cells to have all of those pieces. Otherwise, we're set up for feeling like crap. And when someone with addiction feels like crap, what do they reach for? Their safety mode, their automatic pilot when they feel like crap, whether it's triggered from a trauma, whether it's low glucose because of not eating or not having a steady glucose in their system, or whether it's nutritional deficiency, their go-to is back to the substance of reward.
Welcome to Power Up Recovery with Nutrition. It is time to make nutrition part of the conversation. I'm your host, Christina Veselak, and I'm so glad you're here. Did you know that it's our brain's job to allow us to cope with stress gracefully? But to do that, it needs to be fed optimally. Have you ever wondered why so many committed people relapse or maybe even die? Why so many people on psychotropic medication still feel lousy and still have cravings? What if the missing piece is food, the right food? What if the right nutrients like amino acids or even eating protein every 4 hours could actually balance your brain chemistry and your mood without medication and support lasting recovery? In this podcast, we explore the powerful connection between feeding your brain well, mental health, relapse, and recovery from addiction. We will share insights from experts, inspiring recovery stories, and practical strategies you can use today. Whether you're in recovery, a healthcare professional, or someone passionate about emotional well being, this show is for you. Let's dive in and discover how fueling your body and brain with the right food, the right amino acids, and other key nutrients can fuel your transformation today. Welcome. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of Power Up Recovery with Nutrition, where we get to hear wonderful success stories from people who use food and nutrients to empower their brains for radiant recovery and mental health stability. We interview amazing scientists doing cutting edge research and professionals in the field sharing this wonderful information with ordinary people. So today I am delighted to welcome Dr. Arwen Podesta. New Orleans-based psychiatrist Arwen Podesta is boarded in adult psychiatry, addiction medicine, forensic psychiatry, and holistic and integrative medicine. She is the author of Hooked, a concise guide to the underlying mechanics of addiction and treatment. Dr. Podesta was recently honored as a distinguished fellow, congratulations, of both the American Psychiatric Association and the American Society of Addiction Medicine. And she is the immediate past president of the Louisiana Psychiatric Medical Association. A nationally recognized speaker, educator, and consultant, she champions integrative best practices for treating addiction and psychiatric conditions. Dr. Podesta also offers a comprehensive online masterclass in addiction designed for professionals and the public alike. Welcome.
I'm so glad to be here, and we're very like-minded, and I think the through line, we'll talk about that today. Yeah, I appreciate you taking me in your interview space today.
Well, you're so welcome. I think what struck me when I first, heard about you several years ago, actually, and then read more about you this week is that you really champion what I call the three-legged stool model, that most mental health disorders and addictive disorders have bionutritional or biochemical drivers along with psychosocial elements and spiritual elements as well.
100%. And I think of it as also a three-legged piece. And the way that I come to it, speaking of it, is a kind of a formula, like a mathematical formula. Biology, which could be because of nutrition, because of genetics, epigenetics, plus stress, which could be nutritional stress, metabolic stress, trauma stress, drug stress, plus drug equals
Hmm.
the perfect addend, which is a risk for addiction. And so my simplistic way of thinking about it is to reduce each one of those three pieces. And my job as a treater is to make sure that I'm looking at all of the aspects of each of those pieces, reduce them, and thereby reduce the outcome risk by and making people have the ability to what you call more radiant health and wellness, which I love using
Yes.
the term radiant for it.
Yes. And I really like the idea of reducing both the risk factors, but also the obstacles, because these also become obstacles to recovery. They create relapse, they create these things that we end up tripping over.
Yeah.
And then we have to pick ourselves up, hopefully, and brush ourselves off and keep going. But sometimes people don't always pick themselves back up after tripping over these things.
They might not have the tools to because they don't have the sustainability or the resilience innately, cellularly, even, or even in their surroundings. And so we're going uphill oftentimes if we're not paying attention to replenishing and restoring all of these pieces. You know, not just take the drug away. That's one thing. But
Mhm.
also, we've got to look at nutritional cellular health. I had a
You do.
group of nurses tell me the other day that sometimes when I offer the supplements that are non-pharmaceuticals but potent in treatment, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, in a little bit, that the patients say, "Oh, it's just a vitamin, I don't need it." And then the nurses didn't have the armament to say, "This is why you not just should take it, but why you need it for your recovery." Because cellularly, I'm not saying the person is weak, but cellularly, the system is weakened.
The system is weakened, the brain is weakened, and the language I'm using now, and I didn't use this language when I first started talking about this 25, 30 years ago, but is we've known for decades what nutrients the brain requires to function optimally.
Hmm?
And it's our brain's job to allow us to cope with stress optimally, but to do that, it needs to be fed. It needs to
Yes,
be fed these nutrients that it requires. Now, this has never ever been part of the psychiatric conversation, the addiction treatment conversation. You know, people act as if the brain just operates on its own and gets its food out of thin air, but it doesn't.
right.
It is a physical organ made up of things that we have to put into our mouths to turn into our brain.
Look, I gardened all weekend and I put a ton of fertilizer, specific fertilizer for the citrus trees, specific fertilizer for the orchids, specific fertilizer. Why am I doing that? Because those particular entities, those particular biological organisms need to be fed. And that's exactly what we're talking about. I love it. And so, if we're not giving ourselves the nutritional support, and in fact, we're doing the opposite by
That's
draining
right.
ourselves of the nutritional support, then the cells, the brain cells, the body cells, they don't have the resilience or the wherewithal to do the hard thinking work. And what we're asking folks to do in addiction recovery is hard. And if you
It
don't,
is.
yeah,
It's
it's
hard.
like running a marathon with,
Yeah.
with two broken knees. So if we're not going to fix
Well, two broken knees and no water bottle and no protein bar.
right. All of that. Exactly. And if we're not going to help support that from my treatment perspective, then we're just setting up for what you and I see all the time in addiction treatment is it's not treatment, it's a temporary kind of fix that is
Mhm.
like detox, recovery, repeat, rewash, etc. And so that's why in our system of care, we keep seeing, I have so many CEOs that I've worked with that their whole mission is to get heads on beds. That means that they're getting paid and it's ugly and but it's what serves. And each patient that comes through the system of that sort of care, and this is a loved one that we're talking about. This is, you know, someone we
Yeah.
know. Each of those folks is going to spend at least 13 trials in different
Yes.
systems of care, because the system's goal is to repeat and keep just getting full and getting heads on beds. I wish I was successful to be out of a job, honestly. You know what I mean?
I
But
know.
I don't
I
foresee that. I wish I could, because this heads on beds philosophy, this like repeat and do the same thing over and over, you know that that's a fool's errand.
Well, it's a fool's errand. It's tragic because families give up their life savings to put a loved one into treatment. And most of, especially that sort of treatment program, sees food as a necessary evil, and let's spend the least amount of money on it possible, rather than seeing it as a full-blown treatment modality,
Yeah.
food and nutrients that actually will keep people in treatment over that first week, where so many people leave AMA because they're miserable with post-acute withdrawal.
Hmm.
And nobody, but nobody is telling them that what and when you eat matters to your recovery, matters to your emotional stability, gets rid of your post acute withdrawal. Let's throw in some amino acids to rebuild neurotransmitters really quickly so that you can make it past the first week and actually engage in treatment.
100%. We're speaking the same language, the metabolics, the amino acids, the building blocks, the cofactors, you know, like we need to fertilize our brains and our bodies. Yeah.
We need to fertilize. And this actually makes me think of Dr. David Best. Are you familiar with him?
I know the name. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, he's a researcher out of England, and he's the one that's really done the research that points out that people go take 13 to 17 years of active trying to
Hmm.
stay clean and sober before they achieve 5 years sustained recovery. But he has the concept of recovery capital.
Hmm.
And I was thinking what you were saying about lack of resources, that the more recovery capital people have, the more likely they are to actually make it. And so he talks about community and meetings and jobs and housing and the right type of treatment and all of that as as recovery capital. He doesn't really understand the fact that our brains need recovery capital too. But that's what you and I are talking about as part of this recovery capital picture, to be feeding our brains and our bodies what they need to function optimally so that we can do the rest of the work of recovery.
I love that. I had a talk that I did last spring, I think, with a couple of PhD researchers similar to him. And one of them, I've seen so frequently on one of the slides, we put, you know, risk. And I always say risk of addiction, risk of relapse, risk. And he says resilience capital, which is so similar, this recovery capital. I really like that, the resilience capital, because we're talking about protective factors that we can shape. They're modifiable. Everything you're talking about is stuff that we can modify in our environment, both cellularly and internally, and in our environment externally, including things like housing and support. I think of, you know, a lot of people that may not have personal, intimate awareness or knowledge of certain types of addiction. Everybody knows someone who has struggled with something, but nicotine
Something,
addiction is the easiest one to think about, because in most age groups, everyone knows many people who have tried for many years. I think 13 years, you know? And in one of my patients, he talks about, like, he knows that he is addicted to his dipping tobacco, because every, time he leaves the room, he checks his pocket, making sure he's got his
Right.
tobacco. So he's so addicted, he's thinking about it multiple times a day. And if we can tap into that mindset about what our friends and family members and patients are going through with
That's right.
heroin addiction, with fentanyl addiction, with methamphetamine addiction,
Mhm.
alcohol, benzodiazepine, all of the other categories, cannabis,
THC.
THC, exactly. What is that like? You're thinking about it, consumed by it subconsciously. And it's just hard for many of
Right.
us to tap into understanding what it feels like. But I think nicotine addiction, it really is a great example because it's also phone addiction, goodness gracious. Wow, yeah, the consumption, the obsession is there 100%. So, how can we nutritionally support all of this?
You know, I think in terms of layers. So I tell my students, I tell my patients, I begin with food and I end with food.
Yeah.
And in the middle, we might need purified food because we may not be able to get the nutrients needed to repair, much less maintain our brain and our bodies from the food we eat, even when we're eating perfectly. And nobody eats perfectly,
No,
especially not people in early recovery.
no. Yeah, and those cravings set in too. So, some of the treatment centers I work at, and I don't necessarily disparage this, if someone is eating ultra processed foods every day of their lives for their first 35 years, I'm not, or if their habits are such that they eat rice 3 times a day, or their socioeconomic or such that they only have fast food available to them, coming into sudden recovery, taking the substance of reward away from their brains, and then having them eat, 3 squares of vegetables and organic protein might not be the most palatable for them. And that might be
Mhm.
another area of barrier and rejection. So sometimes we play into a load of kind of harm reduction in some capacity that includes a lot of chocolate, because chocolate pushes that dopamine up too. So does sugar, and the sugar cycle can be equally as detrimental, but
Well,
we know that it is satisfying and can help people kind of ease into the next level.
I'm mixed too. It can certainly help people ease into the next level and can reduce cravings because it's an addictive drug, in and of
Yeah,
its own right. The
totally.
problem is the person who gains 100 pounds the first year of recovery, even just
Mhm.
giving up nicotine
Yeah,
because they've switched over to sugar. The person, and I have a friend right now who's 27 years sober, type 2 diabetic,
yeah,
obese, heart disease, because he switched addiction to sugar the first week, the first year of sobriety to stay sober, because
yeah.
nobody told him about amino acids and real food. And now, 27 years later, he's struggling to let go of his sugar. He goes to meetings, he does everything he's supposed to do, has long term recovery, and yet he's tied to sugar. And it wasn't until he started using amino acids, as we recommend, that his brain could let go of the cravings for sugar. And he's actually beginning to lose weight, and he's absolutely thrilled. But because it takes time to rebuild your neurotransmitters, the days that he doesn't take his amino acids, the days that he doesn't eat his protein every 4 hours, boom, the sugar's back.
Absolutely. And that's I mean, sugar is not, I mean, it has the the slow burn, equally as substance of abuse, equally as our substances we're talking about, but it's not as clear until you do some metabolic work. I'm actually doing a metabolic mindset awareness with my patients, and we're going to
Oh,
be
cool.
using, it's so fun, we're going to be using with I have work with an extraordinary functional medicine nutritionist in my office, and she's been at it for 30 something years as well. Same story as you, different different place, but she and I are doing a month with, or 6 weeks with patients using continuous glucose monitors, tracking our mood, mindset, sleep, all of the things, and then
Amazing.
just awareness. I'm not talking about making massive changes. I just
Right. But
want
just
the awareness.
awareness by itself.
And then we're
Yeah.
going to do a dabble into a modified ketone diet for
Mhm.
about 2 weeks of the time using ketone strips just to have an awareness. Because I can tell you, if no one has given any attention to this in someone's health, if you're primary care or you don't have the fortune to have a nutritionist, and with the mindset of Western medicine is that we're just, name the disease, blame the disease, and then tame it. Hypertension, anti-hypertensive, and then that's what we use. So we kind of joke about that in
Yeah.
the functional medicine space, like you do. But if we're just looking at like, oh, your glucose is high, well, let's not look under the hood and see how we can actually do some modifiable risk factor changes. Why don't we just use a medicine called an anti-glucose medicine or a
Right.
glucose
Right.
modulator? That's why we name these medicines. So it's a very big challenge that you and I are going uphill against every day. But anyway,
Yes.
so I'm excited to
Well,
work with my patients for that in the near future.
oh, that's exciting. I'd love to hear how that goes
I
because,
shall.
I have found in my work with chronic relapsers that missing a meal is the number one relapse trigger for all addiction because blood sugar drops and adrenaline kicks in. And the people we've studied, the week into, whenever we do the study, a week into recovery, a week into treatment, 95% of people in early recovery are testing as reactive hypoglycemic
Right.
after a sugar challenge. And so using the continuous glucose monitor to actually identify and track that, I've been wanting a study like that to come out. So I'm really excited to see what you
Yeah.
come up with.
I'm excited too. And look, I have so many patients in recovery or coming to me for panic or sleep or other
Mhm.
chief complaints. But
Panic.
yeah, panic attack. And, and a lot of people think, oh, I needed to eat. So I thought I was hypoglycemic that was causing me to then need to consume sugar. And then it ameliorates their panic feelings, and yet they're spiking. And then they have this like up and down and up and down, and it perpetuates the problem as opposed to healing it. Whereas if we did a protein at that moment, and instead,
That's
what
right.
if they were hyperglycemic while they were having the panic, then it would dissociate the identity of it being, oh, I'm low blood sugar, therefore I need sugar,
Right.
which is the other thing that we perpetuate in the medical community.
Oh, I've got so many stories about that. But I want to get back to, beginning with food, ending with food, and in the middle, purified food in the name of supplements. So, what supplements do we need? We need your basic cofactors, we need your amino acids to quickly rebuild your neurotransmitter systems, and then we need specialized nutrients.
Mm.
Right? Not everybody needs specialized nutrients like, NAC or NAD or things to support MTHFR, but some people do.
And some
And
people do because of nutritional deficiency or depletion because of diet, but some people can't absorb it. And
that's right.
so many of us are set up with some, and I actually studied genetics before I went into
Mm,
medicine. So I had my little foray in the Human Genome Project in the 90s.
that's exciting.
Yeah, and I love it. And it kind of got me into this field and thinking about everything from like the blueprint that includes
Mhm.
your genetics and then thereby epigenetics. But it's so important. And since my work in addiction, which I started, let's see, I got board certified in 2011. And I think in about 2009 or 10 is when I started working with a team here in Louisiana of thought leaders, and we started doing metatetrahydrofolate reductase variants testing. We
Mhm.
used a popular genetics company back then. We moved away from that, and then we started once you were beginning to be able to get them through traditional lab companies, LabCorp, Quest, clinical pathology labs, other ones, Dominion. Then we
Sure.
started testing it there. So I've tested
So
thousands.
just one moment. For those of you who don't know, we're talking about MTHFR. Most of you have heard about it, and I know people come to me and say, well, I have MTHFR. And I say, which one? And they look at me blankly. So
Yeah.
go on.
Well, yeah, and I think it's so MTHFR, it is very important for the methylation system in every cell, and it's highly linked to production of dopamine and serotonin. And what I learned, and this is a reductionist way of thinking about it, but it's powerful and it works, is that dopamine is the tenant of the neurotransmitter that those who are continuously using are seeking a dopamine boost. So substances and sugar, dopamine boost. And that's what we're getting. So in my simplistic way of thinking about it, if we're up and down and up and down on the roller coaster of dopamine up with, methamphetamine or sugar or heroin or whatever, alcohol, dopamine down when you're coming off up and down, if you're on this roller coaster and you have a limited ability to make your own dopamine because of a genetic variant, then you're set up to have a risk of seeking dopamine, whether
Yes.
it's through cell phone, through substances, through sugar, through bungee jumping, through, whatever, but seeking that heightened reward in the midbrain. And MTHFR is highly linked to that. There's no getting out of that. And what we
No,
see
no.
is that in all comers, if we just look at across the board, now it's interesting, Christina, you know this very well, the folks that we've tested genetically for this particular set of variants, they're mostly Westerners, mostly Caucasian, right? That's just a product of when it
Mhm.
was offered, how genetic testing has come onto the market. So we haven't done a swath of testing that is equal in all different locations around the map and all different ethnicities, which I think is a really important thing to note.
That's right.
However, it is pertinent that those of us who, all comers of those that have been tested, approximately 40 to 65%, depending on where you get your stats, have one of the four variant or one of the main variants we test for. One out
Right.
of four is what we test for. One. However, those that sit in front of me as an addiction specialist, that sit in front of you,
3 or 4. Yep.
yeah, they have so about 90%, which is very statistically significant, of those that were tested in the opioid using population, of those that are tested in the psychiatric serious mental illness population, 90% is how many folks have that. So that's way more statistically significant than, let's say, a basic like, ooh, is it a little correlation? And then we know the mechanism, and the mechanism is truly related to of this MTHFR pathway to nutrient usage to create
Mhm.
dopamine and serotonin and
Yes.
glutathione. So important for our cells to have all of those pieces.
Yes.
Otherwise, we're set up for feeling like crap. And when someone with addiction feels like crap, what do they reach for? Their safety mode, their automatic pilot when they feel like crap, whether it's triggered from a trauma, whether it's low glucose because of not eating or not having a steady glucose in their system, or whether it's nutritional deficiency, their go-to is back to the substance of reward.
That's right. And what's interesting is not just the substance of dopamine as reward, because as we know through the research with reward deficiency syndrome, is that all the neurotransmitters are involved in the firing of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens,
Absolutely.
right? Every single one of them. And therefore, any genetic variants in those pathways, and MTHFR definitely impacts serotonin, there may be methylation issues involved in the other two as well. I think with GABA, there definitely is.
Yep.
I can't remember with the endorphins.
Yeah, well, with definitely norepinephrine. Can I share my little
Sure.
screen? Um, let's see if I can share it in this one way.
Yeah,
One
well, norepinephrine, of course, is connected to dopamine.
Melatonin too. And so sleep
Mhm.
is disrupted with all of this as well. So something to really be mindful about. This is for my scientific brain. Again, I don't want to be reductionist that MTHFR over here and metatetrahydrofolate reductase gene is the end all of this, but it's one of the rate limiting steps in this very fascinating and important cycle that is the methylation cycle that happens in every cell. And
Yes.
you mentioned the production, I mentioned production of dopamine, and then we talked together about also production of serotonin and thereby melatonin, glutamate being turned into GABA, the calming neurotransmitter, as opposed to
Mhm.
glutamate, the excitatory neurotransmitter. And then you're talking greatly about amino acids. We have to have these amino acids that are precursors to all of our building blocks, or all of our and a lot of your work has to do with like serotonin being upregulated by tryptophan, which is one of its precursors, dopamine, and
Mhm.
norepinephrine by tyrosine, etc. But we have to have this pathway in order for those things to happen. And
Yes.
what I like about this picture is that, oh, and one other thing to mention, thousand things to mention here, but glutathione, which is very sexy right now. We want more glutathione for higher brain derived neurotrophic factor, higher neuroplasticity, glutathione and NMN and NAD, or, endogenous
And
anti.
reduction of inflammation.
Right, right. And so they're anti-inflammatory. They're the oldest known anti-inflammatory stuff out there. But the thing is, glutathione is a product of breaking down homocysteine. And for those of you who have had your homocysteine tested because you might have a family history of cardiac disorders, homocysteine being elevated is something that we know is correlated with high risk for, it's considered a biomarker for high risk of heart disease. And so if this cycle is not working in smoothly and efficiently, then homocysteine builds up, bad risk of heart disease. Glutathione is decreased, risk of too few antioxidants. And so we're not doing the whole justice for our patient, for our body, for our brains. All of these things that are in red circles, B1, B6, magnesium, B12, B9, zinc, B3, coenzyme Q, omega fatty acids, all of these things are cofactors that are necessary. So I love what you said that when you're not just, these are the requirements to make the cells function. It's not just a supplemental. And if we're not getting these things through foods, which many of us aren't,
Right.
and or if we have genetic variants that make us unable to absorb them very well, then what are you calling them?
Purified food.
Purified foods. Thank you. I really like that mentality. Supplements are what we came to in medicine thinking of, because they're supplemental to medicine, but they're purified foods 100%. So this, I think, cycle is very important to understand. And it's really should be the tenet of psychiatric treatment and neuronal wellness.
Neuronal wellness, exactly, because the neurons are physical structures made up of physical things that we have to get from our diet that require other physical things in order to function as a living organism, like a factory.
Exactly. And this is the assembly line in the factory, the Laverne and Shirley make in their bottles and products, and the creation of the outcome is all of this stuff. Melatonin necessary for circadian rhythm, sleep wake cycle benefit, serotonin for mood stability and mood enhancement and sleep, and dopamine for focus, norepinephrine for the alarm, GABA for calm, etc. And so I think it's so powerful to see this so that we can envision it in action, so that we, in my world, the treaters that I'm training can understand that it's an essential part, that we have to have every single one of these required cofactors in our system for neuronal wellness, which could be mental wellness, cognitive wellness, people with dementia, people with sleep issues, people with substance issues, people with anything that I say all the brain stuff.
Violence, ADHD, insomnia, right? All these
Yeah,
behavioral issues, it
100%.
it all matters. So, what tests do you recommend if somebody's
Yeah,
listening to this and they're looking at this and they're saying, "Oh, but what do I do with this information?"
right.
Where would you have them start with testing? And
So
then what would be some of the direction they would go in terms of supplementing?
I love this. This is great. Like you can see over on the left, I have so this is some of my master's class. And so I go deeply into all of this. This is just a little preview because we only have the tip of the iceberg right now. I'm going to stay on this slide and I'm going to say MTHFR testing is not necessary in my opinion. And granted, I've been doing it for 15 years, almost 14 years. And I would say I have an understanding of what the phenotype is that connotes the genotype of interest, but I also know that empiric treatment is very easy to do, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But MTHFR testing, if you did want to go for the testing, there are some online resources that are anywhere from $75 to $105. You just look up MTHFR test, and it will test two locations of the gene. 677, it's now a different name because they're looking at the opposite DNA strand and the numbers there, but that doesn't matter, and 1298. And so you get two variants tested, and those are the critical pieces of the test, although there's hundreds of other variants that might be influential. Those are the two that are most highly linked to manifestation of disease. And disease with MTHFR deficiency or variants don't just have to do with brain stuff. This doesn't even talk about some of the other pieces, but the very first place in medicine that MTHFR gene was available to be covered by insurance, MTHFR gene testing was first covered for the obstetric community, for someone who had 3 or more miscarriages, because if someone has a gene variant, especially 2 or 3 of the gene variants that we're looking at, it is very hard for implantation to occur because of a variety of inflammatory things going on in the uterus.
That and neural tube defects.
Neural tube defects, and that's why folic acid, kind of erroneously, but folic acid, it should be activated folate that's added to prenatals, but folic acid has been added to prenatals. And I want to distinguish this. Folic acid, food folate, goes into the cycle. Here it is, B9, da, 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 comes over here, da, 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 bam, it goes through the enzyme that is the MTHFR enzyme that's critical to turn folic acid into L-methylfolate, which is the activated form of folate that then goes through the rest of this cycle and does all these other things. So if you have a blockage right here because you have some of these variants that make this system inefficient and ineffective, partly ineffective, then you do not have the ability to take your folic acid precursor and turn it into the activated folate in a high enough satisfying level. And so that is where overriding this genetic variant is a piece of treatment. And the piece of treatment that I do is use L-methylfolate, use activated folate. That's it.
That's right.
Just use
Which
activated
you can
folate.
buy over the counter.
over the counter, and it's not very expensive. In the over the counter formulations, it's typically, oftentimes, not always, a mono product, which I'll comment on in a moment. And it's oftentimes in a pretty low dosage, which
Right.
is 600 micrograms. And for those with manifestations of this, such as addiction, like clearly there's people, low dopamine, low serotonin, depression, serious mental illness, addiction, active, and they're deficient. I like the higher doses. I like the 15 milligrams instead of 600 micrograms, or the 3 to 6 milligrams. And I also like upregulating, especially if people have had nutritionally depleted intakes for a decade or more, which many of our patients have. So I like having all these other pieces, including thinking about your precursors for your amino acid precursors for your neurotransmitters. So there's some on the market that are covered by Medicaid in some states. And I can put that in the comments later. But there's,
Beautiful.
a handful that can be accessed through coverage of insurance, of private insurance and of Medicaid. So if a patient is not very resource rich, and they happen to have Medicaid, at least in my state and at least 5 to 10 other states, there's one product that is available. You know what? Let me show you this. This is a small type. I'm sorry about the small font, but this is a list of over-the-counter medical foods, prescription medical foods, and I'll share this slide with you if you want to share this along. So yeah, it's fascinating. But let me go back to that picture. And one of the other pieces of this simple but very complicated pathway is zinc and magnesium, and those are and iron. And these minerals are required for synthesis of all these things. And you asked about testing. Every patient does not need to be tested for MTHFR, but if they're in front of me as someone who has a serious mental illness, depression, anxiety, ADHD, or a substance use disorder, then in my head, I already know that phenotypically and based on the research, they're 90% likely to have an MTHFR variant. So I'm just going to pay attention to it and go ahead and make a recommendation that they start or prescribe the prescription form of these activated folates with other cofactors. That said, the other things that we know very well that we can test for, we can test for iron deficiency. It can show up in iron deficiency anemia, but it can also show up if you're not quite iron deficient in your lab levels, but you're also testing ferritin, you're also testing some of the other pieces of the iron panel, and it's subpar, and you boost the iron, it can help push this system to do better on making the dopamine and norepinephrine. Magnesium deficiency, because your kidneys work, hopefully is not going to show up in your blood, but there are saliva tests for magnesium, but I don't think it's necessary, because what I learned, and I think that you and I have seen a lot of the same papers on this, is in my nutrition training, and also my acupuncturists that I work with, they always talk about magnesium as just push magnesium to bowel tolerance. Because if it's the right form of magnesium, then you're going to absorb it. And when you're done absorbing it, then your body's going to excrete it. So we don't want to do magnesium in the form of magnesium citrate, which we use in the hospital for bowel prep. That means that you're getting ready for a colonoscopy, or magnesium oxide. We want to use something that doesn't go straight to the bowels and loosen up too much. We want something that goes to the heart, head, and all the cells. Magnesium bisglycinate or magnesium threonate. So those are two pieces, those magnesiums that absorb, and I have a whole handout on that too. And then zinc, it's very challenging to test. The standard of care for zinc testing in general labs is actually the serum zinc, and it's plasma zinc, but we actually want serum zinc, or vice versa. I actually can't remember, because I just kind of gave up, because the one that the labs, when I order it, they always test the wrong one. And
Well, we want plasma zinc and
thank you.
serum copper.
That's right. Thank you very much. Thank you. I need to write that down because I get it wrong because
By the way, I have it on my wall.
so that we can remember. It's perfect. And so, unfortunately, the labs that I use that insurance pays for patients doesn't do a good job of testing those in the way that I need them to. And so, there's some kind of hacks that we can use. We can also just start treating with a little bit of zinc, but not too much, and help push serotonin. But what we know from some of the trainings I have done is that 80 to 90% of those with brain stuff, whether it's serious mental illness, depression, anxiety, insomnia, substance use disorder, melange of all of those things, they benefit with more zinc, but not too much because too much zinc can cause a copper deficiency. So we got to balance it.
That's right. Well, you've got to balance it. This is why when you can do testing, I really believe in testing.
Yeah.
And we haven't talked about pyroluria, but the research that has been done shows that at least 50% of people with substance use disorders have the genetic disorder of an oxidative stress disorder of pyroluria,
Yeah.
which of course, tremendously tanks zinc and jacks up copper, and then also depletes your PGE1.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And that's true with a lot of, it's something like in those with major depressive disorder, something like 25 to 30% of folks with major depressive disorder have pyroluria. But that's not the end of its manifestation. It manifests because of the critical components of all of these minerals and vitamins. It manifests in different ways in different people.
Absolutely. I mean, when you look at all of the different things that zinc does in the body and the brain, it really just blows me away.
And then the copper excess
Yes.
can come up. And so there is a way, and you're far better at talking about this than I, because it's just, when I get into the weeds with this, it's not where I spend a lot of time because, but the copper excess and testing the copper and zinc balance,
Yeah. Yeah.
that is much more nuanced. And I refer to someone like you to do that level. But what we know is that copper excess makes low zinc happen. But
Yes.
basically, copper excess it leads to, because of you saw like where the copper is or where the zinc is in this, it leads to higher norepinephrine and lower serotonin. So that balance is all messed up. And it's something like 20% of those with major depressive disorder. And most people, not most, many people with ADHD and some people with other things. That's what it's interesting. The postpartum depression or postpartum psychosis
Yes.
is often linked to that, is to
It sure
copper
is.
and zinc imbalance. So my prepartum patients that are just getting ready and have a predisposition to major depressive disorder, we go very carefully along with their obstetrician to prepare zinc in their system before they give birth, so that upon birth, because baby is going to take a lot of the nutrients out of mom, and that's why that
That's right.
happens, not just hormones, but also nutrients. So we prepare by rebuilding or by pre-building a zinc level plus other
Nice.
cofactors like B6 and P5P, to make sure that mom has resilience, has those
That's right.
protective factors.
Well, and when I teach my module on postpartum depression in my advanced course, I talk about all those things, but I start with the omega 3s because most people don't get enough anyway. Most people don't
Yeah.
supplement enough during pregnancy. So baby suffers, mom suffers. And especially if they're having baby after baby after baby, you're right. I mean, hormones can be weird, but the predominant thing I think we see is lack of the omega 3s and lack of your cofactor nutrients, as well
Mhm.
as lack of your amino acid precursors, because baby's taking it all. And maybe mom's had morning sickness throughout her whole pregnancy and isn't retaining the food. and then wonders why she's depressed. Well, her brain actually can't make her happy chemicals because baby's taken all the precursors.
Yeah,
Not baby's fault, by the way, but we
their
need to,
job. That's their
that's where we
job.
need to start. That's where we need to start in repleting mom so that she doesn't get depressed.
Yeah, I love that. And definitely, we didn't talk that much about, or, I mean, I saw you saw omegas on the top of that methylation slide
Yeah.
as one key component, but omegas are other building blocks along with the amino acids. And I feel that, well, people always ask me, like, and I'm curious for what you think. If you just had a couple of things to say for a treater to learn about? What are the top 3 or 5? And for me, it's activated folate and methylation cofactors. That's one bucket.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's B12 standalone because so many folks with many, many psychiatric manifestations, especially serious mental illness and eating disorders, have B12 deficiency. And then people with fatigue, people with low cognition, people with dementia. Omega fatty acids are my
Mm-hmm.
third. And And then my other two, and hopefully we can circle back on this, as it were, talk about lithium. What about lithium orotate? And then also another protective factor, another oxidative damage repair that I'm very involved in is NAD, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. So those are my 5. What are your 5?
I like those 5, although I would probably throw zinc in before NAD,
Yeah.
not because I don't think NAD is important, but because I think zinc is so primary in so
Yeah.
many functions in the body, and it's rarely tested for and it's rarely thought about. And we need enough zinc just, I mean, think about your poor pubescent boy. Okay. How many teenage boys in our country are seriously struggling?
Yeah.
Right?
So many, so
Millions
many.
and millions of them. Why? Well, here's my pet theory. Okay. I don't know if it's been studied, but it's still my pet theory. Maybe I should say hypothesis. And that is that since zinc is tremendously required to build the prostate, I think the prostate uses up 10 times more zinc than any
Mhm.
other body organ. So a pubescent boy is requiring zinc to grow the prostate, grow the penis, make testosterone. And let's say his diet isn't the best. Okay.
Yep.
And so we know that the body is going to prioritize reproductive health because it prioritizes continuation of the species.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's going to
Job.
steal zinc to make sure that reproduction happens, okay, in puberty. That means that there just may not be enough zinc left over for thyroid health and for neurotransmitter production. So we need zinc and B6 for serotonin. We need zinc and B6 for GABA. And we need zinc and B6 for everything else in the world. Okay.
I
But
love it. But no, and you're right. And if you can't repair if you don't have the pieces to repair with. So all the NAD in the world is not going to repair the oxidative damage if you don't have the tools to do the repair, if you don't have the bricks to rebuild the wall. And zinc is one of those bricks.
and zinc is one of those bricks.
Yeah.
And especially the zinc testosterone connection that gets forgotten in pubescent boys. So that's a little pet thing. But other than that, I absolutely agree with your 5 and amino acids.
Yeah.
Because even if in with any mental health disorder, at least the majority of them, all the addictive disorders, even if we're getting enough protein in our diet, which most people don't, we then have to digest it and we have to absorb it. And it has to go everywhere first to make all these little amino acids, right? Make our DNA and make our skin and make our muscle and make our enzymes and make everything else. And it almost looks like the neurotransmitters get what's left over
Right. Well,
because
that's not,
the
I mean, our
body,
mood. who cares? Like, like you're
Right.
right. Like it's perpetuation of the species from, from a Darwinian standpoint, right? It's just
You
that's
don't have to be happy. You
that's right.
just have to be alive, which means your
Yeah.
heart has to be beating, your lungs have to be working. These are all muscles. These muscles require amino acids. So I think the brain gets what's left over, and there may not be enough to make your neurotransmitters robustly.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant.
Then, if there are genetic SNPs in any of your neurotransmitter pathways, which means you need more aminos to kind of get over those blockages, and then if your aminos have been, or your neurotransmitters rather, have been depleted by substance use, and right, then I think that it's imperative. This is why, I mean, yes, I believe in beginning with food and ending with food, right? And my book is called Eat. I also like over the counter amino acids
Mm-hmm.
because
And
they
they're
work
so
within 20
accessible.
minutes. They're so accessible and they
Yeah.
work within 20 minutes and
Right.
they're anti-addictive. And what other nutrient can you say works robustly within 20 minutes?
Yeah, it's wild. And it really does. And that's where, like you said, those that are in the chronic cycle of substance and relapse and
Yeah.
substance and relapse and recovery and detox and relapse, getting those amino acids in is so important. And like you said, if folks forget to take them, it does a wallop to their system and it makes them much more at risk. I have a question about not amino acids, but about omega fatty acids that I
Yes.
would like to hear your thoughts on. I'm always trying to, because a lot of my patients and a lot of the treatment folks that I work with, their patients also don't have a dime to, two dimes to rub together, as it were, but they're trying to do their best. And so I'm always trying to access things that are covered by insurance, such as we can write for vitamin D prescriptions. We can write for, at the right level, knowing how to test and knowing how to treat. We can write for certain vitamin Bs, B12, particularly the injection, but other ones. We can write for certain activated folates. We can write, and some insurances cover it, including Medicaid in many states. We can write for a synthetic omega fatty acid, omega-3 ethyl ester, and it's indicated for cardiac disease, for risk of cardiac disease in the family, and risk of and high triglycerides in particular. Is that something I've seen it have effect on cardiac profiles very easily? It has great evidence of that, and I see to a degree that patients are getting the same response as though they were eating lots of fish products and taking fish-oriented omega fatty acids, but these are synthetic. Do you have an opinion on the synthetic version, or am I sideswiping you with this question?
I wish I had an opinion on it. I actually don't know. But I just interviewed Dr. John Umhau, who
Yes.
does research on omega 3s for the NIH. You know him.
Yep, I know him well. I love John. He's brilliant. And yeah, he does a lot of great nutrient research on omegas and on vitamin Bs and on D. He was on the vitamin D board for a long time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, in our conversation, he said, look, for my patients who don't have a lot of money, I just say eat a can of sardines every day.
Bingo.
Eat a can of mackerel every day. Eat a can of salmon.
Mm-hmm.
And these generally have low mercury toxicity, high protein, high levels of omega 3s, and are relatively affordable.
That's
I
great.
know I
And
can get a can of sardines for $2 a can,
mm,
right? I can get a can of mackerel or salmon for between $3 and $4 a can, and it works.
yeah, that's brilliant. I remember a nutrition medicine course I went to probably I don't know, 8 to 10 years ago, where the audience is all physicians. And so on the flip side, they said, eat a spoonful of caviar a day. And I was like, well,
Oh,
I don't see my patients being able to do that. But of course, that's brilliant.
I'll
And
go for it.
I know, right? We'll do that together when we see each other live.
This has been an amazing conversation.
I appreciate
So,
it.
how can people contact you? And this information will be in the show notes,
Great.
but how can people reach you?
Yeah, so I have a master's class that's available on this and more in addiction specific, and it's Dr. Arwen, DRARWEN.com. My YouTube channel, you can look for me on YouTube, Dr. Arwen, and then you can find me and contact me on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Instagram, Dr. Arwen, ARWEN. So I look forward to connecting with anyone interested in these things and as passionate as you and I are about them. I think this is such an important area that is so commonly missed in our field.
It really is. So thank you so much for being with us. And thank you all for listening to this episode of Power Up Recovery with Nutrition. And if you enjoyed it, please push the like button and the subscribe button and share it with as many people as you certainly can so that together we can all get the word out. Thank you for tuning in to Power Up Recovery with Nutrition. I'm Christina Veselak, your host, and I hope today's episode has inspired and equipped you with new insights and tools to support your recovery journey or practice. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who could benefit from the knowledge shared here. Stay connected with us for more episodes filled with practical advice, expert wisdom, and inspiring recovery stories. Remember, nutrition is a powerful tool in mental health and relapse prevention. Power up your recovery today. I'm Christina Veselak, and I'll see you next time.